Everyone knows that the Munsters are the cutest monster family on TV. But one event in 1965 went too far. This is the story that almost killed the show. It involves illegal props and dangerous stunts. The terrible events of that day meant that the video would never be seen again. Now we're going to tell you the real reason this episode never aired and why the group wouldn't talk about it for decades. The Munsters weren't thought of in the 1960s. In fact, it all started in the 1940s when Looney Tunes artist Bob Clampett had an idea for a cartoon about a funny monster family. It never caught on, even though he worked on it for years. The thought stood still, ready to come up, for the right time. In the early 1960s, that time finally came. The idea was also put forward by comedy writers Alan Burns and Chris Hayward, who are known for their work on Rocky and Bullwinkle. They got the idea from a drawing in The New Yorker by Charles Addams, which was about a creepy but cute family. But instead of coming up with something new, they went to Universal Studios. Universal owned the rights to well-known monsters like Dracula and Frankenstein. They thought it would be fun to use these well-known animals in a show. Everything was changed by that choice. With bolts on his neck and an awkward but likable personality, Herman Munster turned into a father in the style of Frankenstein. Count Dracula was played by Grandpa in a funny way. The family lived in a huge, broken-down house on a quiet street in the suburbs. They saw them as just another family. Everyone else thought they were scary. This idea was brought to life by writers Norm Liebman and Ed Haas. In the first pilot, Love Thy Monster, they wrote about the characters and the humorous tone of the show. The Munster family wasn't trying to be scary. Their only goal was to live like any other American family. That's what the joke was about. What time? It was perfect. Monster movies from the past were becoming popular again in the early 1960s. Universal began putting out old horror movies again, and people fell in love with them all over again. Putting monsters and sitcom fun together was just what TV needed. Universal Studios helped make the show what it is today. They were able to use the famous monster designs without breaking the law because they owned the rights to them. This gave the show a unique look that made me think of classic Hollywood horror movies. The company also did great special effects and makeup. A famous makeup artist named Bud Westmore worked on the show. He made sure that Herman, Grandpa, and the others looked like real monsters from movies while still having enough personality to be funny. Universal had an effect on more than just the looks. They also changed the tone of the show. The Munsters didn't make fun of scary movies. They loved them. People who like old monster movies might enjoy the connections, and everyone else might find the family's everyday problems funny. The Munsters was mostly a spoof of life in the suburbs. The family thought they were perfectly normal. After dinner, they both went to work and worry about everyday things like school and work. But because they looked so scary, they constantly scared and confused their neighbors. This difference was used in a smart way by the show. It was also funny at family sitcoms in general. In one episode, Lily tells Herman that he should have a serious talk with Eddie like the dads and Father Knows Best, or leave it to Beaver. The moment turns into a joke, though, because Herman's advice is so silly. These sitcom tropes were used in a new and funny way by the show. Also, Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis played more than just Herman and Grandpa Munster. They made the show what it was. They first met the Munsters on a different show called Car 54 many years ago. Where are you? They played different kinds of New York police cops, and it was clear that they got along. People loved them both together. Even better, they became good friends in real life. When the Munsters came along in early 1964, that link stayed strong. The people who were casting knew right away who would play Herman and Grandpa. The first ones picked were Gwynne and Lewis. Because they were friends, the Munster family seemed real. Changing, he wore thick, heavy boots that were raised 4 inches and had lots of padding inside. His outfit made him weigh an extra 40 to 50 pounds. Things got worse because the studio lights were too hot. He once worked out all day and lost 10 pounds. Even so, he did his best in every scene. Herman is one of the most memorable TV figures of all time. His deep voice, silly laugh, and childlike charm made him stand out. After the show was over, he and Lewis stayed close off-screen. Fans thought their friendship was stronger than what they showed on TV. It wasn't always easy to decide who to cast. The mother of the Munster family used to be called Phoebe, and Joan Marshall played her. But there was something wrong. She looked too much like Morticia Addams from The Addams Family, a show that was going to air at the same time. People were getting the two shows mixed up, so they decided to make a change. They got rid of Phoebe as a character and added Lily Munster in her place. They picked Yvonne De Carlo as the new actress because of this. De Carlo was known for playing dramatic parts. She had been in important movies like The Ten Commandments. At first, Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis were not pleased. They didn't think she could handle the comedy, but De Carlo showed them they were wrong. One easy instruction was given to her. In Lily, you should act like a typical mother from the 1950s, but with a gothic twist. She knew what she needed to do. Herman's silly personality was matched by her beauty and charm. She quickly became an important part of the family. Member of the Munster family. That was not the first time that Butch Patrick was cast as Eddie Munster. Nate Happy Durman played Eddie in the first movie that was never shown. That Eddie was a spoiled brat who caused trouble. They changed it because it didn't go with the show's fun tone. As soon as Patrick stepped in, Eddie became more likable. He was naughty but never mean. That helped young fans connect with him, which in turn helped the show connect with families. Patrick loved working for the Munsters more than anything else. It was a big part of his life. Getting to work with Gwynne and Lewis taught him a lot about acting. He has said nice things about those years and how much fun it was to work on set. He remembered those things even after the show was over. Early on, Marilyn Munster's part also changed. She was first played by Beverly Owen. She did leave after 13 shows, though. She had no desire to play the part in the first place. She felt terrible on set because she had been tricked into signing a contract. She even left sometimes in tears. She finally found a way to get out of her deal, so the producers had to find someone else to do the job. That's when Pat Priest helped. Priest was a great fit. Only Marilyn looked like a normal young woman, but she never thought her family was weird. For her, they were just normal. That difference made for some great funny times. She also helped keep the show balanced by giving viewers someone they could connect to. Priest became close with her co-stars over time, and her Marilyn became just as remembered as the rest of the Munster family. The Munster house at 1313, Mockingbird Lane, on the other hand, wasn't just a place. It had its own personality. The house looked like it came from an old, scary movie, but it had a certain charm that made it feel like a real house. It was based on Victorian-era mansions, especially those in San Francisco. However, it had a darker, scarier look to fit the Munsters' monster background. The outside of the house looked like a mix between a real building and a Hollywood set. Universal Studios had a house in the backlit that was changed to look like the Munsters' house. The inside was built on a set where every part was planned out with great care. The show was funny because of the grand stairs, the dusty chandeliers, and the lab in the basement. There were paths and places inside the house that were kept secret and were often used in stories. Herman would sometimes break through a wall by mistake. At other times, Grandpa's basement projects would go very badly wrong. It was clear that the show was linked to Universal's old scary movies, such as Frankenstein and Dracula. The house felt just the right amount of scary and funny because of these movies. It looked like it was haunted, but it was never really scary. Working on the monsters behind the scenes was just as hard as what you saw on screen. The actors had to deal with long makeup sessions, heavy outfits, and how hard it was to act in front of hot lights. Fred Gwynne's costume made it very hard to shoot. Because his boots were so heavy and had so much padding, it was hard for him to do even easy things. Even though Yvonne De Carlo's skirts were pretty, they were hard to move around in. The Drag ULA, a car that looks like it came from a Halloween fever dream, is one of the craziest things that has ever happened in Munster. It was made from a real coffin made of plastic. The idea came from an episode of Hot Rod Herman from 1965. In that episode, Grandpa Munster had to build a dragster to get the family's other car back. It wasn't easy to get the box, though. It was against the law in California at the time to sell one without a death certificate. Richard, Corky Corkes, had to be sneaky because he worked with George Barris, who designed the car. He was able to find a funeral home that would work with him. The body was left outside the back door at night. There were no questions. The rest of the car was put together quickly once they had it. 350 horsepower came from a 289 cubic inch Ford the 5th 8 engine. The tailpipes looked like the pipes on a church organ. The back wheels had huge Firestone race slicks on them. The front wheels were very small and came from an old buggy. To make it even scarier, each hubcap had a silver spider on it. The movie Munster Go Home showed the car. Over the years, at least 5 different kinds were made. Some ended up in private collections, while others went to museums. The Munster coach was another one. The Muncie coach was made for style, while the Dragulay was made for speed. This one was also made by George Barris, who also made the Batmobile in the 1960s. The bodies were from three 1926 Model TS that were stretched over a 1927 touring car frame. The Munster coach became as well known as the show. It was shown in parades and art shows, and even ended up in private collections. It was hard for the group behind the scenes. Al Lewis, who played Grandpa Munster, had to deal with his fake nose, which was a surprise. At first, the nose was a lot longer than what most fans remember, but there was a problem. The nose got wet, squishy, and lost its shape every time he drank coffee. The beauty team finally cut it down because it was too much trouble. The pilot for the Munsters that never aired was called Fair Munster, and it had a big impact on how the show turned out. It was shot in late 1963 so that networks would want to buy the show. This early version was not the same as the one that aired, but it helped build the basis. One of the most surprising things about it was that it was color. It made sense at the time because TV shows were becoming more lively, but that changed when the show was picked up. Not only did shooting in black and white save money, but it also gave the show a classic horror feel. It looks like the old monster movies that Universal was known for. It was shot on the back lot of Universal using the same suburban street that was used in Leave It to Beaver. That was a joke. The Munsters seemed like a normal family, but their house looked like it was spooky and they had a dragon as a pet. Everything was funnier because of the difference. Norm Liebman and Ed Haas wrote the story, and Norman Abbott directed it. It had all the right parts in this early draft, but a few things needed to be fixed before it was ready for TV. The hiring was one of the main differences. Quinn Munster was played by Joan Marshall in the pilot. Later, this character was given the name Lily, and Yvonne DiCarlo played her. The makers thought twice about giving Phoebe the part, because she looked and acted a lot like Morticia from the Addams Family. They wanted Lily to be both scary and friendly, like a mother. That balance was better after the actor was changed. Eddie Munster was also not the same. Nate Derman played him, and what he did with Eddie was much worse. He growled, acted crazy, and was mean, which made him look less like a kid getting into trouble and more like a real monster. When the show went on, he was replaced by Butch Patrick, who made Eddie more fun and easy to relate to. He was still a werewolf boy, but he no longer felt like a monster from a horror movie. Instead, he felt like a kid from a comedy. Things did not change for Herman and Grandpa Munster. Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis were already cast in the pilot, so we knew a lot about their roles. But Herman was played in a different way. He wasn't as funny or cute yet. He seemed more like a classic Frankenstein monster in this form, with a deeper voice and a more serious tone. He wasn't like a silly but loving dad. When the show was picked up, that changed. They made him softer, which made him funnier and more likable. The pilot's voice also sounded different. There were some funny parts, but the tone was mostly scary. The music was also different. From the pilot, the theme song had a surf rock sound that made it fun. It wasn't quite right for the scary mood of the show, though. That version had a theme with a lot of brass that became one of the most famous TV songs ever. The pilot did what it had to do, even though it was different. Universal Studios used it to show networks how horror and comedy could work together in a family sitcom called The Munsters. CBS liked the thought, but they wanted some changes. They wanted different actors, the show to be in black and white, and it to become more comedic. The Munsters were a huge hit after these changes. Fans can now buy the unaired pilot on DVD and see how the show changed over time. It's a rare look at an early version of something that made history. It was more than just a funny show about a monster family on the Munsters. It had something to say. It had funny parts, but it was really about big ideas like acceptance and what it means to be different. Even though the Munsters looked scary, they thought they were just nice, loving people. But other people didn't always see it that way. Operation Herman, which aired in 1965, was a great episode that showed this perfectly. A tonsillectomy and was in the hospital to rest. Because he was a good dad, Herman wanted to see him. The trouble was that he was so tall and had a face that looked like Frankenstein's. It was very hard to sneak in. What came next was typical Munsters fun. There were mistakes, funny parts, and people working at the hospital who thought Herman was a patient who got lost. The show had more than just silly jokes, though. At one point, Lily tells Herman that he needs to talk to Eddie really deeply. That was the kind of thing that would happen in old-school family comedy. She even brought up Father Knows Best, a show famous for having the perfect American family. In the adorable way that Herman always does, he said that those kinds of conversations usually happen on the Donna Reed show. It was just a joke, but it showed how the Munsters felt about themselves. It wasn't trying to be the most polished show ever. It was something else, something that knew what it was like to not fit in. This theme came up in a lot of shows. Someone in the neighborhood of my fair Munster says that the area was nice before the Munsters moved in. People used the line to make fun of something serious that was going on in the 1960s. Many families had to deal with prejudice just because they were different. Even more was done with the idea in Munster Masquerade, which was another episode. Marilyn Munster, the family member who seemed normal, had a boyfriend. They couldn't wait to meet her until they saw her family. When they found out Marilyn came from a house full of monsters, they didn't want anything to do with her. That's why the joke worked. It turned things around. Marilyn was different from her family, but to everyone else, she was the only one who fit in. It was easy to understand. People make assumptions about others based on how they look, which isn't always fair. Eddie's nickname was one of the most powerful parts of the whole show. Eddie was worried about his safety. He was sat down by Herman to talk. What he said was one of the most striking parts of the show. What I want you to learn is that it doesn't matter what color, how tall or short you are, how fat or thin you are, how ugly you are, or how handsome your dad is. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What counts is how big your heart is and how strong your spirit is. In a funny show like this was a brave move. No jokes were used to hide it. A joke didn't make it better. It was clear. It was truthful. It hit a nerve with the crowd. That's what made the Munsters stand out. There was more to it than monsters living in the real world. It was about how different people are treated. It was funny to make a serious point. For some reason, it did that in a way that seems still important today. When the Munsters first came out on TV on September 24th, 1964, it was a family show like no other. Having a father that looks like Frankenstein, a mother that is a vampire, a son who is a werewolf, and a grandpa that looks like he belongs in a horror movie. It wasn't normal, but it worked. By the end of its first season, it was one of the most famous shows on TV. People loved how it mixed comedy with old-school monster tropes. It came in at number 18 on the Nielsen list, right next to Gilligan's Island. The critics also paid attention. That year, the show was up for a Golden Globe Award. It's a rare honor for a comedy with such a strange plot to win. Years later, it was nominated for several TV Land Awards to honor its lasting effect. One award specifically pointed out the change in cast when Pat Priest took over as Marilyn Munster from Beverly Owen. The show stayed strong even after a major part was filled by someone else, but no show stays on top forever. Something new started on ABC in January 1966. Batman came out of nowhere with lots of bright colors, lots of episodes, and a campy sense of humor that hooked people right away. People who used to watch the Munsters were now interested in Gotham City. Ratings for the Munsters began to drop. It fell so far that it was ranked number 61 at the end of its second season. The network went ahead and called the number that was shown. The Munsters was taken off the air in May 1966. There's a lot more to the Munsters than just their original run. Back in the 1960s, the characters have been brought back to life over the years through spin-offs, movies, and reboots. This shows that the scary but sweet beauty of the Munster family never really goes away. Follow-ups like The Munsters Today, which ran from 1988 to 1991, were some of the most well-known. The way this new series was put together was interesting. It didn't go straight from the first one. Instead, it said that Grandpa had put the family to sleep by mistake for 22 years. When they finally woke up, it was late 1980s, and they were trying to get used to a new time. The show, which starred Lee Meriwether as Lily, Jason Marsden as Eddie, and Howard Morton as Grandpa, ran for 73 episodes, longer than the original series. Munsters Go Home, the first full-length movie about the Munsters, came out in 1966, right as the TV show was ending. People saw the Munsters in color for the first time here, which made their creepy but cute looks stand out even more. The story of the movie was about Herman inheriting a British manor, which set off a crazy adventure in England filled with sneaky relatives, a hidden treasure, and a drag race. It stayed true to the show's spirit by having Fred Gwynne, Yvonne DiCarlo, and Al Lewis play Herman, Lily, and Grandpa again. Several made-for-TV movies were made to try to bring the brand back to life. In 1981, most of the original group came back together for the Munsters' revenge, but didn't get enough viewers to bring the show back. Two more TV movies with new stars tried to recreate the magic in the 1990s, but none of them were able to do so. When it comes to reboots, things have been different. A darker, more serious version of the show, directed by Bryan Singer and starring Jerry O'Connell as Herman, was made by NBC in 2012. Many people have tried to bring the Munsters back. It had great production values, but it only got to the pilot episode. In 2017, the Munsters were supposed to move to cool Brooklyn, but that plan was quickly shelved. Rob Zombie tried to bring back the Munsters as a movie series in 2022, which was the most recent attempt. Zombie's version, on the other hand, relied greatly on campy humor and a bright, exaggerated style. The movie had mixed reviews. Jeff Daniel Phillips played Herman, Sherry Moon Zombie played Lily, and Daniel Roebuck played Grandpa. Some fans liked how familiar it was, but others thought the story wasn't good enough. Still, the fact that it was put on Netflix kept the Munsters in the public eye, showing that the family is still important in TV and movies. Movies and songs. A lot of times, shows like The Simpsons have paid respect to the Munsters, especially in their treehouse of horror episodes. Eddie Munster was a big influence on the character Eddie Munson in Stranger Things. This shows how deeply the show has become a part of popular culture. The show's famous theme song has been covered by many singers over the years, which shows how well known it is. But the people are what really make the Munsters stand out. Fred Gwynne played Herman Munster in the first season, and he became a symbol of the show's fun and heart. Even though he looked like Frankenstein, he was a nice and funny dad, showing that even monsters can be loved. A lot of shows and movies have made fun of and copied his deep, booming laugh and childlike joy. Al Lewis brought another level of humor to the show as Grandpa Munster. He was a strange vampire who liked to do crazy experiments, so his basement lab was always a mess. He was one of the most loved figures because he was naughty and had an old-fashioned Dracula charm. His style can be seen in other comedic monster movies over the years. The Munsters have an effect that goes beyond memories. It helped make shows that are funny and scary at the same time. It was just as popular as The Addams Family, which ran around the same time. The Munsters was more of a lighthearted show, while The Addams Family was more of a dark comedy. That mix of scary and funny stories led to shows like What We Do in the Shadows, which combines vampire myths with silly humor, and even Stranger Things, which combines spooky elements with touching family relationships. Suburbia was a spoof of the perfect American family that turned things on their heads by making the show's monsters the nicest parts. That charm still works after all these years, showing that the simple magic of monsters will always be popular, even in a world of modern shows and big-budget remakes.